side of his plantations. So they become, like monoculture, they become a really easy way to launder the money. Yeah.
So WikiLeaks. What about the Iran-Contra? Since we're back in Iran again?
Yeah.
Are you familiar with that whole story?
I am, and I don't know. So we've taken a more we've taken a more contemporary look at it, but certainly, I guess what I'm saying is that these existing social and economic relations would go back to that time period as well.
The early research maybe doesn't make the connection though, right? Because we hear a lot of the hamburger connection, but they never really pushed it to what financed the deforestation. I'm thinking of like Susanna Hecht and Alexander Coburn's work from the 80s, where they have documented the deforestation element, but they haven't really gone through and unpacked what you've done here, which is what are the sources of investment that actually have driven this particular phenomenon.
And in a sense, we could go on forever, but the whole U.S. government involvement, which predates this by several decades, and is happening now elsewhere in the world as well. So sort of tying that piece in would really make your co-authors not want to go public, but it would certainly be an interesting piece of the puzzle and important not to miss.
He's banned from Costa Rica.
Yeah, that's
He's not allowed in Costa Rica.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can't bring him there.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can think about the United States' direct involvement, and part of the simple fact is that we just don't have the same level of data to make the claims that we'd like to. But we can.
But wouldn't it be interesting to get even just the existing data with old satellite photos, and see if you couldn't see if there was a similar deforestation peak when Oliver North was sending cocaine to the Contras.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Anyway.
So it's thinking about extending this. Okay, so we're using a global commodity chain analysis for this. This is the kind of the framework, and I always look at things as social ecological regime shifts. So I like the kind of the policy shift, the ecological shift. You know, a forest cover loss, a flooding event. I kind of like to see it that way. But the way that we framed this as a project is with the commodity chain, and that is really nice for thinking about political economy and how that works historically. And so you can expand it back in history, you can look back in history, you can look forward, and you can look vertically and horizontally up the commodity chain. And so one of the things that we've hit on is the potential existence of narco organic strawberries in California that are laundered through similar processes.
Wow.
And so I won't say too much about that.
That sounds great. That sounds super interesting.
But yeah.
So we're all complicit in that.
So we're all complicit in the commodity chain. That's right.
Although wouldn't it be an interesting twist in the story to talk about the environmentally destructive narco dollars and the environmentally beneficial narco dollars, which are in Colombia actually super positive.
Yeah. So the narco bourgeoisie, and sort of how do we think of narco money as contributing to development? This is maybe the big question, is how can we imagine a narco state that functions to bring people out of poverty? And there's some examples of, like in Medellin, the rise of a narco middle class. So I mean that's one of the big questions that we have in the background.
Student questions, I'm done.
Questions?
So you say you interviewed 3 of the narcos, right?
Yeah.
How did you approach them? Were you like nervous?
It just happened. So
how did
one
you
of them,
locate them in the first place?
I didn't go to interview them intentionally, but so for example, one was a narco-enrolled alcalde, like a mayor, and so he was the new mayor of a municipality, and he had a business that catered to narcos, and he was. The mechanism is actually really interesting. So there's this indigenous community that's the major population in this area, and they have this ancestrally titled land. And so what he was doing is charging them back taxes on their communally titled land, their ancestral land, and then taking pieces of it from them and then selling it to narcos. And so he was a facilitator, and I don't actually know his level of involvement, but he explained the whole process, how the mechanisms of the state were involved in this process of narco deforestation. Yeah.
Okay. So earlier you mentioned that people migrated to Chicago not because of the hurricane, but because of labor migration.
Yeah.
So why would they want to move like each year? Is that something like agriculture possible to do?
So this is the big question. I mean, so the big question to me is Barishal in sort of in a large way becoming uninhabitable? Has that shift already occurred? Are people totally dependent on labor migration and remittances? Or or is this something that we could observe in the timescales that we have data? So yeah, I mean, yes, there are huge flows of labor migration, and we don't know exactly why. But the fact is that the cyclone didn't seem to affect it. I think that's a significant finding. Yeah, no finding is a finding. Yeah.
Question. So I really enjoyed the case study presented on the collapse. I didn't enjoy the collapse of the fishery and the cooperative, but the story was very compelling about what caused the migration. So I guess, would you say that well, I can envision another scenario where a cooperative collapses because of competition with aquaculture, for example, or some other. So is there something distinct about either a natural disaster or climate causing migration versus kind of the globalization causing some of the migrations? Because you can kind of see both at work in different places, and maybe is that something that was also going on at the same time, or?
Yeah, and that's exactly so when I was talking about the way that we can see maybe the way that I frame migration as adaptation is the constrained set of alternatives that are constrained both because of ecological reasons, but perhaps because of resource politics and political economy.
Okay.
And so that they're sort of narrowing down the range of alternatives. And we saw in the Peruvian case study, which I didn't get into, that really it was these resource politics that determined whether people stayed and farmed or left.
Okay.
And so in some places where there were really influential mining companies, or there's Duke Energy, there's a famous water conflict around the Perón Dam in this area, where Duke Energy has taken the water, they've asserted water claims. And this means that there's less water available for irrigation in the community. And so,
Got it.
yeah.
There are multiple layers of what's going on.
And what's common is that people are still pushed across the threshold.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Any other questions? We have time for maybe one more questions, and I know that I have more, but I want to hear from somebody else.
Oh, I have one more question.
Okay.
I knew it was in that.
You said you accessed the data from the tower. How did you go about doing that? Did you get a code tower? Like, that sounds complicated.
Okay, so there's
Can you
some.
explain, please?
There's the mobile network, and there's the kind of the network central repository of data. So at the Grameen Phone headquarters, they have a set of servers where they get data from all these relay stations, and it comes into one central place, and that's where the data are collected. And actually, if we were to talk about these data, I didn't even mention the privacy issues. I didn't mention the national security problems and what we have to do to be able to work with these data. But increasingly, the way that this sort of work is done is remotely on the phone company's server. So we actually don't even get the raw data. We just submit code that does the analysis, and then we get outputs back. So we don't even see the individual level data.
So did you have an app into your phone, or
No.
how did you send the? You said you sent a code. How did you send it from your own phone, or?
So every time you call a phone, every time you connect to a tower, you're registering with that tower. The phone company needs to send you a bill. They need to bill you for your usage, and so you're generating automatically at the phone company's headquarters a record that you use that specific tower at that specific time. And that's how it goes. I think we should all be very aware that these data are being
You guys heard
collected and used.
Ed Snowden.
Snowden. So these are the
National
metadata.
security.
These are the metadata.
I've
Exactly.
never heard of this.
So in a question sort of related, did you need some special human subjects approvals? Because the people who use their cell phones couldn't release
Right.
their data.
So they've
Is
released it to the company.
Is the company have within its privacy policy, I know you guys read the privacy policies.
Right.
Within the privacy policy, does it already give the company that permission?
And we should be aware that phone companies are giving and selling our data
All
for
the time.
All the time.
All the
So
time.
lots of different groups, all the time. They can do whatever the heck they want with it. And you can do some terrifying stuff with these data. If we were to just talk about what you could do with these data, you can, so we know from the Snowden stuff, specific methodologies that were employed to predict the likelihood of you being a terrorist, or you being a criminal, or you associating with terrorists and criminals. But it goes beyond that. It's predicting likelihood of drunk driving. They're predicting likelihood of engaged in criminal behavior at any given time. Like if you're just driving down random streets, this registers on the phone, with the phone company, and that would flag as anomalous behavior. And so that might be a predictor of criminal behavior.
There's an application you can download on your phone that people may might not, but that uses it exactly in order to disguise his voice or to project another number.
It's
or
terrifying. It's terrifying. So this is exactly what Snowden told us the NSA was the data that the NSA was using, and we're using it for good, to think about monitoring impacts of climate change. But we should all be aware of the digital signatures that we're leaving behind.
Well, this has been really fascinating, David. So
Thank
thank you
you.
so much for take advantage of David while he's here on campus, chop in his office hours and
For
talk
those
with
of
him
you who
about
don't
this
know,
stuff.
he's teaching in the climate change class, so he's around on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
So, thank you so much again, David. We'll see all of you next week. We're going to be in this classroom for the rest of the semester. So I think I'm giving a talk next week.
I
So.
just have a quick question. Do you have this cold in here right now?
Yes.
Yeah. As soon as I'm looking around, everyone's where's the thermostat? I've got to get this place warmed up. So we'll
We're going to start fire
do
next
some
week.
climate change.